In 1991, one of the most powerful wrestling companies in the world did the unthinkable. They fired their own World Heavyweight Champion. What they didn't count on, though, was that the champion would walk right out the door and take the very symbol of their company with him. This is the story of how a bitter boardroom feud with the legendary Ric Flair led to him taking the iconic big gold belt to the rival WWF. It was a single act of defiance that cost one company its credibility and changed the world of wrestling forever. To really get how a massive wrestling promotion could lose its champion and its championship all at once, you have to understand what wrestling looked like in 1991. For decades, the National Wrestling Alliance, or NWA, was the dominant governing body in the sport. Its biggest prize, the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship, that beautiful belt often called the 10 pounds of gold, was the most prestigious title anywhere. And for the better part of a decade, that title was synonymous with one man, the Nature Boy, Ric Flair. Flair wasn't just a wrestler, he was an icon. The limousine-riding, jet-flying, kiss-stealing, wheelin'-dealin' son of a gun. He was the world champion. By January of '91, he had just beaten his great rival Sting to capture the NWA title for a record 7th time. At this point, the NWA's power was mostly centered in Ted Turner's World Championship Wrestling, or WCW. While they were technically two different things, WCW was the home of the NWA Championship, and Flair was their guy. But being the NWA champ wasn't all glory. It came with a weird financial catch, a tradition left over from the old days of carnival promoters who didn't trust anyone. To make sure the champion wouldn't just vanish with the industry's most valuable asset, whoever held the title had to put up a $25,000 cash deposit. It was a bond, a guarantee that the champion would honor his dates and lose the title when he was told to. Once he lost, he'd get his deposit back, plus any interest. For years, Ric Flair had paid his deposit, and since he often won the title back, he just let the money roll over. It was a gentleman's agreement, a sign of trust. That deposit, a dusty old relic from a bygone era, was about to become the most important $25,000 in wrestling history. The match that lit the fuse for this whole meltdown wasn't held in a ring, but in an office. In 1989, a former Pizza Hut executive named Jim Herd was hired to be the executive vice president of WCW. Herd knew absolutely nothing about the strange, circus-like world of pro wrestling. His job was simple: cut costs and make WCW more like Vince McMahon's cartoonish and family-friendly World Wrestling Federation. Herd looked at WCW, a company built on gritty, athletic, Southern-style wrestling, and just saw an outdated product. He saw long, bloody matches where he wanted marketable characters. He saw old-school wrestlers instead of larger-than-life superheroes. And when he looked at his 42-year-old World Heavyweight Champion, Ric Flair, he didn't see the greatest wrestler alive. He saw an aging, expensive employee whose time was up. This clash of philosophies, the corporate suit versus the wrestling traditionalist, set the stage for a war that would tear the company apart. Jim Herd wanted to fix something that, to Flair and the rest of the wrestlers, wasn't broken. He saw wrestling as a business to be streamlined. Flair saw it as an art form to be protected. The two were on a collision course, and the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship was right in the middle of it. The tension between Flair and Herd didn't just explode overnight. It was a slow burn of creative arguments and financial disputes that pushed the Nature Boy to his limit. The most infamous idea came when Herd decided he wanted to completely overhaul Ric Flair's character. After more than a decade of perfecting the Nature Boy persona, a character loved by fans and respected by everyone in the back, Jim Herd wanted to just throw it all away. According to Flair and his good friend Arn Anderson, Herd pitched a truly wild idea. Flair should shave his signature blonde hair, wear a diamond earring, and re-debut as a Roman gladiator named Spartacus. Now, Hurd later denied the Spartacus name, but he did admit to brainstorming new gimmicks. To Flair, this was more than an insult. It showed that the man in charge had zero respect for his legacy or the fans' intelligence. The disrespect wasn't just creative, it was financial. WCW had lost money in 1990, so Hurd was looking to slash the budget, and Flair's huge contract was his prime target. When it was time for Flair to renew, Hurd offered him a new deal that would have cut his pay almost in half. To make it even worse, this pay cut came with a demand that Flair move down the card to make room for younger guys like Sting and Lex Luger. This led to the final breaking point. The plan was for Flair to lose the championship to Lex Luger at the upcoming Great American Bash pay-per-view. Flair, being the professional he was, had no problem losing the title. He'd done it plenty of times. But this time was different. He told Hurd he'd do it, but on one condition. He wanted his $25,000 deposit back, which, with interest, was now closer to $38,000. Hurd didn't see this as business. He saw it as a shakedown, and he flatly refused. According to Flair, Hurd's response was crude and dismissive. The trust was gone. The lines of communication were dead. Here was the world champion, the face of the company, being asked to take a massive pay cut, change into a ridiculous new character, and walk away without the money that was rightfully his. Something had to give. On July 1st, 1991, just 2 weeks before the Great American Bash, it happened. A new plan was floated for Flair to drop the title to his friend Barry Windham at a TV taping, just to buy some time. But the bad blood ran too deep. Convinced that Flair was just holding him up for more money, Jim Herd made a call that would live in wrestling infamy. Over the phone, he fired Ric Flair. Let that sink in for a second. The reigning NWA and WCW World Heavyweight Champion, the biggest star in the company's history, was fired just days before he was supposed to headline a major pay-per-view. It was pure corporate arrogance. Herd had solved his Ric Flair problem, but he'd created a much, much bigger one. WCW now had a pay-per-view to sell with no main event, no champion, and, most critically, no championship belt. Because when Jim Herd fired Ric Flair, he forgot one tiny detail. The 10 pounds of gold was still in Ric Flair's possession. And since that $25,000 deposit was still unpaid, as far as Flair was concerned, that belt now belonged to him. The chaos was immediate. Back in WCW, it was panic mode. The Great American Bash, which was built entirely around Flair versus Luger, was in ruins. The company officially stripped Flair of the WCW Championship, but the damage was done. At the event in Baltimore, the arena echoed with a single, deafening chant. "We want Flair! We want Flair!" The fans were rejecting the show, the company, and Jim Herd's entire vision. In a desperate move, WCW put Barry Windham in Flair's spot to face Luger for the now vacant title. But there was another, very visible problem. They didn't have a belt. The iconic big gold belt was with Flair. In a truly embarrassing spectacle, they had to dig up an old, generic title from Dusty Rhodes' personal collection and slap a makeshift metal plate on it that read WCW World Heavyweight Champion. Lex Luger won the match and became the new champion, but his big moment felt completely hollow, drowned out by the ghost of the man they had just thrown away. Meanwhile, a few states north, the ground was shaking. Ric Flair, now the hottest free agent in the world, called Vince McMahon. Just a couple of months later, in September 1991, wrestling fans watching WWF television saw something that should have been impossible. Bobby the Brain Heenan, one of the WWF's top managers, appeared on screen. And he wasn't alone. Cradled in his arms, gleaming under the lights, was the NWA Worlds Heavyweight Championship, the big gold belt. Heenan announced that the real world's champion was coming to the WWF, holding up the very symbol of his competition as proof. it was a declaration of war. When Flair finally showed up, he carried the belt with him, a move so bold it sent shockwaves through the industry. WCW slapped them with a lawsuit, which led to the WWF having to digitally blur the big gold belt on TV. A bizarre sight that only made the whole thing feel even more controversial and exciting. Flair was now in the WWF, parading his old boss's title on their rival's show, and all WCW could do was watch their credibility go up in smoke. As crazy as Flair's jump was, something like it had happened before. Almost 30 years earlier, a similar power struggle gave birth to the very company Flair had just joined. The original Nature Boy, Buddy Rogers, was the NWA champion. But powerful promoters in the Northeast, including a young Vince McMahon Sr., felt Rogers was a bigger draw than the guys the NWA board wanted to push. When the NWA forced a title change from Rogers to Lou Thez, McMahon and his partners refused to recognize it. They broke away from the NWA, formed the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, or WWWF, and simply declared Buddy Rogers their first ever world champion, even inventing a fake tournament win in Rio de Janeiro to make it seem legit. That single act of defiance created the company that would one day become WWE. Flair's departure in '91 had a similar seismic effect, but instead of creating a new power, it mortally wounded an old one. On September 8, 1991, the NWA officially stripped Flair of their championship. For the first time in its long history, the National Wrestling Alliance had no champion. The title would stay vacant for nearly a year, a devastating blow that the NWA's reputation never really recovered from. WCW had to move on, creating its own separate WCW World Championship and cutting its lineage from the NWA forever. Jim Herd, the man who started the whole disaster, was gone from the company within months. Flair, on the other hand, had one of the best runs of his career in the WWF, culminating in a legendary performance where he won the 1992 Royal Rumble to become the WWF champion. This story is a perfect example of how backstage drama can be more exciting than anything in the ring. If you enjoy these deep dives into the real stories behind the spectacle, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. The night the NWA fired its champion wasn't just one night. It was a slow, cascading failure. It all started with a clash between a corporate suit who saw wrestlers as interchangeable parts and a champion who saw himself as the guardian of a tradition. Jim Herd's attempt to save a few $1,000s and flex his authority ended up costing his company millions, and, more importantly, its credibility with the fans. For a brief, surreal time, the big gold belt became more than just a prop. It was a symbol of defiance, a legal bargaining chip, and the ultimate trophy in a promotional war. When Ric Flair walked from WCW to the WWF with that title in his bag, he drew a line in the sand. His exit sped up the decline of the once mighty NWA, handed the WWF one of its greatest storylines ever, and left WCW with a black eye that took years to heal. It was the ultimate proof that in wrestling, the toughest battles aren't always in the squared circle, but in the cold, unforgiving reality of the boardroom.